My name is Scott Leroy. Leroy is L-E-R-O-Y.
Thank you. Mr. Blair?
Thank you, Your Honor. Sir, how are you employed?
I am currently retired from the Michigan State Police and work two part-time jobs as a private fire investigator and as a medical examiner investigator.
And when you were employed with the Michigan State Police, what was your role there?
My last role was from 2001 to 2020. I was a fire investigator stationed here in Paw Paw.
And how long were you with the Michigan State Police for?
31 years.
When did you start there?
I started in 1989.
And as a role as, for instance, starting at the Michigan State Police, did you just start out as a fire investigator?
No. My first 10 years, I was a road trooper at the Ithaca Post. In 2000, I got promoted to uniform sergeant, and I was a supervisory uniform sergeant at the Lakeview Post. Then I transferred down here to Paw Paw in 2001 in the role of a fire investigator.
Fair to say that as your time prior to becoming a fire investigator, you were trained in, basic investigative skills, evidence collection, that sort of thing?
Yes.
And then you indicated, what year did you become a fire investigator for the Michigan State Police?
2001.
And prior to becoming a fire investigator in 2001, was there a certain level of coursework that you had to attend or go through?
I had attended, before I got into the Michigan State Police, I attended Lake Superior State University, obtained a bachelor's degree in criminal justice, and an associate's degree in fire science. While I was a trooper, I took some courses in the initial fire investigation course and a follow-up, more advanced fire investigation course.
And I assume that before the Michigan State Police allows you to go out and start investigating fires on your own, is there some parameters or qualifications that you have to meet?
At that time, no. I always just had to go through, apply, go through an interview process. Well, in that time, I'm sorry. At that, I was able to transfer in here on the transfer roster.
And as part of your fire investigation training for the Michigan State Police, what coursework did you have to go through? Can you restate that for me, please?
Well, I've gone through, since I've been with the State Police, I've gone through a lot of coursework. Started out with what's called Fire Investigation 1, then Fire Investigation 2. I have my CV here to review all the classes if I could, to refresh my memory, or no?
Well, let me ask it this way.
Okay.
Have you provided a copy of your curriculum vitae or CV to the prosecutor's office?
I have.
And the show has been marked as People's Proposed Exhibit 33. And ask if you recognize that, sir.
This is a copy of my curriculum vitae or CV.
And that's a fair and accurate representation of what you provided to the prosecutor's office as your curriculum vitae?
Yes.
Move for the admission of 33. All right, so let's, I guess, kind of go through. So basically, to become a fire investigator of the State Police, you go through, you said Fire 1 and Fire 2. Is that correct?
Correct.
And is there some on-the-job training you have to go through as well?
Eventually, yes.
What is that?
Once I became a fire investigator down here, I would go to scenes with a more senior fire investigator. I did that for about 1 or 2 months.
And then, is there continuing coursework you're required to do when you're at the Michigan State Police?
Not then. There is now.
And have you, even though may not required, did you go through additional coursework?
Yes.
What type of coursework did you do?
There was many different courseworks. I took a class in vehicle fire school, electric and gas appliance fire school, solid fuel burning, which is a fancy way to say fireplaces school, done post-blast school with ATF, taken fire pattern and recognition class, residential electricity for fire investigators. That was a class I took. What's called an ATF enclosure, which was another 2-week course at the ATF fire research facility out in Maryland. Spent 2 weeks there. Class in ventilation and flow path and growth. Ventilation is the fire, the air affecting of the fire. And recently a fatal fire investigation class. All those official, I kind of skipped over some of the ones like hazardous materials and things like that.
And like what agencies offer these types of classes?
Different agencies, the Michigan State Police offered some of them, ATF offered some, the International Association of Arson Investigators, which goes by an acronym IAAI.
And let's talk about IAAI. Do you have any specific certifications as a fire investigator?
I do.
And what are those and who are those through?
I hold 2 national certifications. The first one is a certified fire investigator through the International Association of Arson Investigators. I obtained that in 2006. I also am a member and obtained a certification called Certified Fire and Explosive Investigator. That's with the National Association of Fire Investigators. I obtained that certification in 2019.
I just need to strike the last part with respect to anything past 2007. This case is about his expertise level in 2007.
I would disagree. I think he's allowed to give his training experience today, and if that would affect or change his opinion, obviously, then Mr. Miller's free to ask him about that. But I think his experience today is just as relevant as it was in 2007.
I agree. I'll overrule the objection.
Now, with respect to, so it sounds to me like you've done a continuing level of coursework throughout your years as a fire investigator, fair?
Yes.
And have you been qualified as an expert in courts before?
Yes.
In what field?
In fire investigation, I've also been an expert in meth lab identification.
And as part of being a fire investigator, is that, we've heard maybe terms called cause and origin. Is that something that you have opined about in courts before?
Yes.
And do you recall how many courts you've been qualified as an expert in?
I've been qualified 47 times in origin and cause investigation, including, I believe, 7 times in this court.
Your Honor, at this point in time, I'd move to admit Scott Leroy as an expert in fire investigation, cause and origin.
No objection, Your Honor.
Receive his testimony as an expert.
Thank you, Your Honor. Sir, I'd like to take you back to January 7th of 2007. Do you recall that date?
Yes,
And on that date, were you still working for the Michigan State Police?
I was.
And what role were you working in at that time?
I was a detective sergeant with the Michigan State Police Fire Investigation Unit out of 5th District Headquarters here in Paw Paw.
And we've heard terms thrown about the word fire marshal. Is that you?
That would be yes, that's me.
Okay, all right. Just so there's no confusion, when we hear the term fire marshal, are you commonly referred to as a fire marshal?
That's there's a small difference, but more people usually just interchangeably use those 2 phrases.
And on 1/7 of 2007, did you respond to a residence on County Road 215 in Lawrence Township?
Yes.
Do you know that to be the Stermer residence?
Yes.
And how was it you were dispatched on that date?
I was contacted by cell phone at home off duty at approximately 4:30 in the afternoon and informed of the fire.
And did you then respond?
I did.
Do you recall about what time you responded?
I arrived on scene approximately 6 p.m.
And upon arriving on scene, can you describe what you observed? I guess you rephrase that. Upon your initial arrival, what did you observe?
There's obviously a lot of activity going on. Fire department was there. Sheriff's Department vehicles were there. I approached there was a lot of commotion going on. It was it was rain/snow going on. I would have contacted whoever was in charge, either the fire chief or the lead law enforcement on scene.
And is this kind of just the process of you beginning your investigation into this fire?
Yes, I would do that just so they know I was there.
And What about the condition of the house at the time you arrived on scene? Can you describe that for the jury, please?
The house was still actively smoking. There were no flames to be seen, but there was a lot of smoke still coming out of the house. There was a fire apparatus parked right in front of the house. I believe it was a ladder truck with hoses still on the ground and active fire suppression going on.
Now, this might kind of go without saying, but I have to ask this anyway. Does the fact that the fire is still going on, does that prevent you from going in and conducting any investigation at this time?
Yes.
And at some point in time, did you have the opportunity to view the body of Todd Stermer?
I did.
How is it you came to do that? Can you describe that for the jury, please?
One of the officers on scene directed me to where Todd Stermer was laying, and I went over there and I would document Todd Stermer's body, which is common practice for a fire investigator at a fatal fire scene.
How is it you document that?
I use photographs.
So the evening of the 7th, you took photographs?
Correct.
Do you recall exactly what you would have taken photographs of on the evening of the 7th?
On the evening of the 7th, I took photographs of Todd Stermer. I also took some initial photographs of the structure and some of the surroundings.
And I was going to ask you. So that's, may I approach it, sure? Sir, I'm going to show you what's been marked as People's Proposed Exhibit 34-1 through 34-31. Ask if you take a look at those, please. Having looked at People's Proposed Exhibit 34, do you recognize those photographs?
Those are photographs that I took both the evening of the 7th and the next day on the 8th.
Those are fair and accurate representations of the observations you would have made then on the 7th and the 8th of January 2007?
Yes.
Your Honor, at this point in time, I'd move for the admission of 34-1-3431.
Exhibits.
May I publish to the jury?
Yes.
Thank you. Sir, I'm going to show you, if we can, 34-1. What are we looking at here in this photograph?
This is the front or east side of the structure on the evening of the 7th. And you'll tell evening of the 7th is dark and snowy. The photographs of the 8th are during the daytime.
And do you recall about what time it was you were taking these photographs?
It would have been after I got on the scene after 6 p.m. I don't know exactly when.
And contained in this photograph, right here about center where I'm circling with the red laser pointer, what are we observing there?
There's fire hoses coming from the fire engine, and there's also a red gasoline can.
And does that become relevant here a little later on in your testimony?
It will.
And looking at 34-2,
This is the rear or west side of the residence. And just to the very far left, you can see the front bumper of a van.
34-3,
That is the van from the previous photograph, or the bumper of the previous photograph.
now you're obviously on scene as a fire investigator, correct?
That is correct.
Can you explain why you're taking pictures of a van?
As I'm a fire investigator, but I'm also a detective with the Michigan State Police. So if I see something that may be evidence, I'm going to take note of it, especially in the evening when it's dark. I take a photograph of it because you never can take too many photographs of something. So I noticed this van behind, and I think the next picture will show what I noticed, so I took some pictures.
Now, I'm going to ask this if I can right now. You've been shown approximately 31 photographs here today, is that correct?
Correct.
Is that the full totality of all the photographs you took?
No.
How many photographs did you end up taking in this case?
It was over 100.
And looking at 34-4,
That is a close-up of the van bumper where I noticed what could be blood.
and 35-5.
35-5, that is going to be the north side of the house.
I'm sorry, Your Honor. Thank you for that. And looking at 34-6,
This is on the north side of the house. Also what appeared to be blood on the ground. And then if you go back to 5, you can see with my photograph just to the lower right, you can see the 2 orange flags that are in the ground.
where I'm circling again with the pointer.
Yes. And those are, and 6 is a close-up of those flags.
And Your Honor, I guess I'm going to kind of warn the court the next couple of pictures are going to be a little bit graphic of Mr. Stermer, so I don't know how the court wants to proceed with that or give the family an opportunity.
Copies I can look at?
Yes, Mr. Leroy has them right there.
Okay.
Be 7 and 8.
Jury, there's some graphic photos coming up next, so just alerting you to that, okay? And if there's any members in the audience who want to leave the courtroom while they're on display, I can take a break and let you leave. No one? Okay.
I'm going to show you what's been marked as 34-7. What are we looking at here, sir?
That is a photograph of Todd Stermer as I was examining him.
And we are looking at, there are several items in this photograph. Is that a fair statement?
Yes.
What are we looking at these items, if you're aware, here on the chest of Mr. Stermer?
Specifically the chest, well, I can see the 2 larger pads are AED pads, which are used by EMS. And I believe the smaller ones are heart sensors over on the chest and abdomen area.
And there are a multitude of what look like clothing items here. Is that a fair statement?
Yes.
And do you know how those got there?
Apparently bystander or EMS and Good Samaritans who arrived on scene first placed blankets and clothing over Mr. Stermer, and I would have removed some of them in order so I could photograph Mr. Stermer.
And looking at 34-8, what are we looking at here?
That is Mr. Stermer's feet, and around his feet are a pair of gray sweatpants and a pair of white socks on his feet.
And with respect to those sweatpants, was there anything peculiar about them that you noticed?
When I took other items, the blankets and other items off of Mr. Stermer to photograph him, there was a detectable odor of a liquid accelerant in the area from Mr. Stermer, and as I got closer, they seemed to be coming from the sweatpants.
I'm going to show you what's been previously marked, if I may approach, Your Honor. People's Exhibit 17. See if you recognize those.
These are the sweatpants that are in a nylon bag with my initials on them.
Those are the ones you then removed from the body of Todd Stermer?
Yes.
And these are the same sweatpants you indicated smelled of a liquid accelerant, is that correct?
That is correct.
Who's on direct?
It's a clarifying question, Your Honor.
Going forward.
Fair. Now, on the 7th of January 2007, did you collect any other evidence?
I did not.
Did you then return to the property?
I did.
On what date was that?
The next day, on January 8th.
And on that date, what did you do?
On that date, it was concentration on starting my cause and origin investigation of the house.
And how is it you go about doing that, generally speaking?
In general terms, when you do cause and origin investigation, I'm going to examine the house, both exterior and interior, noting burning, things that aren't burned, things that are gone, that have burned up. It's a general examination. You typically do the entire, or you do the, if possible, the entire exterior, and if possible, the entire interior.
Now, when you returned on the 8th, was the scene still secured?
Yes.
How was it secured?
The sheriff's department had left a patrol car on the scene overnight.
Was there also like crime scene tape or anything like that you recall?
I don't recall if there's crime scene tape.
And was this in the daytime or nighttime hours that you did this? On the 8th?
On the 8th. It was the daytime.
Do you recall about what time?
It would have been, the exact time, no. I know it had been shortly after 9 a.m. because that's when I was notified of the search warrant.
And as part of your, I think you've talked about a walk around, do you take photographs?
Yes.
And did you do so in this case?
Yes.
And looking at the remaining photographs in People's Exhibit 34, do you recognize what those are depicting, just generally?
All these photos are 34, correct?
Yes, those are all
yes.
34, but I'm asking about the remaining.
Yes. Yes. Those are the next day on the 8th.
And what is the purpose in part of the purpose in taking these photographs?
To document the scene.
And in this case, just generally speaking, do you recall what you took photos of?
I took photos of the house, both exterior and interior.
Now, were you able to make a deep entrance into the interior of the house?
I was able to make entrance into the house on the west side. I tried to make entry into the east side, but that was limited due to the structural collapse that was on the east side of the structure.
Is part of your process also to collect physical evidence?
Yes.
And where do you collect that from, if you can kind of just generally detail that? For instance, inside the residence, outside the residence?
If I see something that is potential evidence, I'm going to collect it, inside or outside.
Fair enough. Have you heard the term excavation before?
Yes.
What does that mean to you?
In fire investigation community, excavation means removing fire debris from the scene in order to look for evidence or other patterns to help determine where and what could be responsible for the fire.
And did you conduct an excavation in this case?
I did.
And was that captured in your photographs?
Bits and pieces of it were captured. Unfortunately, the major, the scene after I excavated it, I cannot find a photograph of it.
And also, as part of an investigation into a fire, do you collect samples?
I can.
And describe for the jury what those might entail, if you can, please. What the samples might be, that you might look for or collect.
If I'm sampling items to look for ignitable liquids, I will typically look for the surface that is in the area of origin to see if there was ignitable liquid in the area of origin, which often includes carpeting, carpet pad, flooring, carpet tack strips, or other parts of a structure that remain behind in the area of origin that may hold traces of a flammable liquid.
All right. And so let's go ahead, if we can, and go back to your photographs. If I look at 34-9, what are we looking at here?
That is the front or east side of the structure.
And in 34-10?
That is the south side of the structure.
Now, there is, for lack of better words, we'll call it a rectangle cut along the cement foundation here. Do you see that?
Yes.
Do you know what that is?
That will be done during fire suppression. If you go back one, you can see the same thing happened on the east side. Below the windows, you can see there is holes cut in the wall. That is standard for a fire department to do that, especially if they can't make entry through normal access, the doorway, or in this case they couldn't because of the structural collapse.
What is their purpose in cutting those holes in the house?
To get access to the interior to put the fire out.
Spray it with water?
Yes.
And let's go to 34-11. What are we looking at here?
That is the north side of the house.
And there is a large green object depicted here in the photograph. What are we looking at there, if you have any knowledge of that?
That is a fuel oil tank that is filled to typically power a fuel oil furnace.
And 34-12.
This is the rear of the house, or the west side of the house, facing the back.
And 34-13.
This is an aerial photograph. During the scene, I had a fire department aerial truck come to the scene so I could get above the house and take a photograph from the top down.
So we're kind of talking like a ladder truck type of thing?
Yes.
Okay. With the bucket on the end?
I don't think this one had a bucket, but it was a ladder truck.
Okay. But that allows you to get up high and look down in?
Correct. This is the day before drones.
And 34-14?
This is also from the aerial truck with a house and showing the more of the yard towards the north.
And there are some persons kind of standing here in the photograph. Any idea who those are?
I believe one is the deputy from Berrien County Sheriff's Department who was doing the measuring, and probably more law enforcement officers.
And there were photographs earlier taken of some flags that you saw, is that correct?
That's correct.
Are those also depicted in this photograph?
Let's see if I can. I believe they're down there to the right. There's an orange dot. I don't think that orange dot is it, but the flags are right in that area.
And if you have knowledge, there are some tire tracks contained in this photograph. Is that fair?
Yes.
Do you know what those go to?
Those were to the wrecker that came and took the van the night before.
Looking at 15.
This is another photograph showing to the north.
And as you've previously testified, is that Mr. Galou's
I believe so.
Okay.
I can't identify him from this photograph.
And 16.
With the ladder truck hasn't moved, so all I've done is turn 180 degrees. That's the shoulder of the firefighter who's behind me, making sure I don't fall, taking a picture back down the driveway back towards the road.
And 17.
17 is a close-up of the rear or west of the house, specifically focusing on the basement door and windows.
18.
This would have been from that basement door, standing right at the door, taking a picture straight in to the structure. So I'd be facing east, taking a picture of the debris in this area.
Now, without getting into too much detail, there are a few objects contained in this photograph other than debris.
Well, it's all debris, but it's identifiable debris. How's that?
Fair. So, for instance, my laser pointer, I'm pointing at an object in this part of the photo. Do you recognize that?
Is that the fireplace from the upstairs fireplace?
Where my laser pointer is?
Yes, that's the upstairs fireplace.
Fair. And what do we have right here at the bottom?
That is a section of chimney pipe.
And looking at 19.
That is a close-up of the fireplace for the upstairs.
And, moving on. Let's look at number 20.
That is a close-up of inside the upstairs fireplace.
And can you kind of explain to the jury why it was you would have taken a photograph up close and at this angle?
This is basically showing that it appears to be a fire in the fireplace, or there's remnants of a fire in a fireplace because of the burnt wood inside.
And that would be this object right here where my
Correct.
laser pointer is?
Correct.
And looking at 21.
21 are the sections of chimney pipe that I removed from the inside of the residence during my excavation, and that's where I stacked them.
22.
So 22. This photo, I've now stepped into the basement area through the center door of the basement. I've now rotated to the right 90 degrees. So if you look to the very tight left side of the photograph, that's going to be where the fireplace is. So this view is looking directly south to where there were two bedrooms, a downstairs bedroom and an upstairs bedroom. The floor is burned away. The separating the first floor and the basement is burned away in this area. You can see there's a window up and down. There should be a floor there to separate the first floor and the basement level.
Looking at 23.
So 23 is I've now turned 90 degrees back. So if I walked into the basement from the outside, I walked straight forward, and the solid charred wall on the left side, that is adjacent to the basement fireplace. I am documenting the location of the laundry room behind that wall. You can see 2x4 studs going up and down. There was a wall there. So just behind those studs, you can see just the outline of right there is the washer and dryer.
And what are we looking at in 24?
24 is I've made my way back there and documented the dryer.
And 25?
So I've stepped back in the middle of the downstairs basement, facing east, because you can see the fireplaces. But I'm focusing more to the north or left in the area where the fuel oil furnace is located. Before we go to the next photo, you can notice just above the basement fireplace is a large 2x12 piece of structure that is black charred. And I'll show you why that's important in a second, in the next photo.
What is this green that we can see here at the top of the photograph?
That is the roof. You're looking at the shingles from on top of the roof, specifically on the north side of the house. As it collapsed inward.
And in 26?
You can see the long charred board that I pointed out earlier that's above the basement fireplace. To the left of that is the remains of the furnace. The metal portion, that's the furnace.
And 27?
27 is a close-up of the furnace.
And 28?
28 is back outside in the front, documenting where the 1 gallon gasoline can was, or is located.
And 29?
Is a close-up of the gasoline can that I eventually collected as evidence.
Just a moment, Your Honor, I'm sorry. So I'm going to show you Mr. Marks already admitted as People's Exhibit 18. Do you recognize that?
This is the gasoline can that I collected, and these are my initials on the tape seal.
Does it indicate what time it was you collected it?
It says I collected it at 1:40 p.m.
And that was on the 8th of January?
on the 8th.
Thank you. And just so everyone's clear, this is in a clear, crinkly kind of bag. Is that fair?
Yes, that bag is made out of nylon.
Is that important?
Yes.
Why is that?
You cannot put evidence that you're going to have the lab checked for presence of ignitable liquids in a plastic bag. It has to be in either a nylon bag or a metal paint can.
And can you explain why you can't use plastic bags or any other container?
One of the important reasons is when the lab tests these samples, they will put the sample bag and all into an oven to try to heat it up. If you did that with a plastic bag, the plastic bag would melt, and if the plastic bag melts, it can give off petroleum-based products.
So therefore, we can assume that that nylon bag doesn't melt.
That nylon bag does not melt at the temperatures that they're subject to in the lab.
Fair. Now, looking at People's Exhibit 34-30.
This is a shed located to the southwest of the main structure.
And why are you taking a picture of a shed?
I'm documenting that shed is there and is unburned.
And 31.
I am this is inside that shed, noting that this is an area where fuel cans are stored.
And I may have forgotten to ask this. We've talked about you collecting the red gas can that was out in the front yard, correct?
Correct.
Why did you collect that?
At the point I collected it, I did not know if it was evidence but it could be potential evidence because it was found in an area not with the other cans.
And following your documentation with photographs, your inspections, your excavations, so on and so forth, did you also try to collect any samples in this case?
I did not.
Why not?
Because the area I identified as the area of origin, the areas that I would have wanted to collect samples were gone. They were burned up. They didn't exist anymore.
And what would that have entailed if you could have collected?
It would have been the first floor. The flooring, any carpeting, any material on the first floor.
But your indication was those were totally consumed?
They are totally consumed, yes. Just as you can see by the earlier photographs from the basement up, there is no floor left.
And following your investigation at the scene, did you then go to another location on the 8th?
Yes.
Where did you go?
I went to the Van Buren County Sheriff's Department
What was your purpose in going there?
to package evidence that they had collected from the scene the night before, clothing and other material that were on Todd Stermer that night.
Do you recall what those were?
There was blankets, there was a coat, there was some clothes that came from Linda Stermer herself. They were in the evidence room of the Sheriff's Department, and I went in there and packaged them into nylon bags.
And did you collect any other evidence when you were at the Sheriff's Department?
At the Sheriff's Department, they also had metal paint cans that were collected at the autopsy of Todd Stermer. I collected those at that also.
And were you responsible for then transporting those items to the State Police Crime Lab?
I did. I transported all those items to the crime lab in Grand Rapids on January 11th.
Your Honor, can we approach very briefly? Sir, as a fire scene investigator, are you familiar with something called the scientific method?
Yes.
What is that, please?
Scientific method is a basic, is the basic method that investigation should occur. More of a, not the nuts and bolts, but more of the mental process of doing an investigation.
Fair to say it's the process by which you arrive at your ultimate opinion in a case?
Yes.
And when conducting a fire scene investigation, are there two different conclusions that you must determine?
Yes.
What are those?
The first thing I must determine is the origin of the fire, where the fire starts, and then try to determine the cause or why it started.
Now, with respect to the scientific method, did you follow it in this case?
Yes.
And do you recall what the steps of the scientific method are?
The first two steps are determine a need or define a product, determine a need and find the problem, which is, we almost skip over those because it's always the same two things. There's a fire, and the action that needs to be taken is to determine the origin and cause. Next step is to collect data. And data can be anything from observable patterns, witness interviews, lab samples, all the data. The next step is analyze the data. The data that I've collected, observed, I look at it and try to determine what that means. The next step is to develop a hypothesis, a theory. I'm going to develop as many theories that I can initially. All the theory for what I'm doing. If I'm doing the origin, I'm going to develop theories or hypotheses of all the areas where the fire could have started. Then, once I've developed these hypotheses, I'm going to test these hypotheses or theories. And I'm going to use the data. The data I've collected, I'm going to take all the data and see if that data fits in to these theories or hypotheses. And as I go through there, if there is data that doesn't fit a certain hypothesis, then either the data is wrong, or if the data is right, that hypothesis cannot be right. If all the data cannot fit in to that hypothesis. And then at the very end, I take that last hypothesis, that becomes my final hypothesis, and again, I take all the data that's known, look at that hypothesis, and come to the final conclusion.
So with respect to what we've discussed here in court so far, you've gone through the first couple steps because you showed up to a fire scene, correct?
Correct.
As far as data collection, is that what we've also talked about here in court?
Yes.
And that would be your photographs, your scene examinations. Does that include your samples you may or may not have taken from a fire scene? Is that fair?
Yes.
Does that include witness statements as well?
Witness statements are very important.
And does that also include lab reports?
Lab reports are very important.
And in this specific case, did you recall receiving any laboratory reports related to the items you seized from Mr. Stermer or those you collected at the Sheriff's Department?
I did.
What was that, please?
The lab report, and I'm doing this without looking at the lab report myself. So the gray sweatpants that I collected on the 7th indicated positive for gasoline. The gasoline can that I collected tested positive for gasoline. The items that were packaged in the metal paint cans that came from autopsy, which included the left and right socks, the underwear, and a shirt, all tested positive for gasoline. Other items that were collected that I packaged myself in the Sheriff's Department evidence lab would have been the clothes from Linda Stermer, blue and a blue blanket, a white blanket, and there may be another item that I packaged. Those items did not show the presence of ignitable liquid.
If Mr. Ernst has already testified here in court about his findings, we would rely upon those exact findings. Is that fair?
Yes.
But you specifically recall the sweatpants, socks, and underwear of Mr. Stermer being positive for gasoline.
And the shirt.
And in addition to that, we talked about witness statements. Is that correct?
Correct.
Were you made aware, did you have an opportunity to review the statements of Linda Stermer?
I have.
What do you recall those being?
The witness statements from Linda Stermer as relates, and I was specifically looking at as it relates to the fire. They're pretty consistent that she was in the basement doing laundry when she heard Todd Stermer scream. She goes up the stairs and looks into the living room, on the main floor living room. She sees the chair, the recliner chair, on fire, and Todd on fire across the room towards the bedroom with a line of fire between the chair and Todd.
Thank you. Now, I may have gotten a little bit ahead of myself there, so I'm going to take a little step back. Let's talk about the area of origin if we can.
Okay.
Did you develop various hypotheses as far as what the area of origin may have been in the Stermer house?
The pretty standard, when I look at a house fire, the original hypothesis is the whole house. I look at the whole house as the fire starts here, and then through a process of elimination, I start examining each area and then decide if this is or if there's or is not the area of origin. Often when you start out, it's pretty easy as you start, that's the key word, when you start, it's pretty easy to look at a room where there's no fire damage and say, fire didn't start here, so you cross it off and you start moving closer. And typically you're moving from the least fire damage to the most fire damage, with the most fire damage typically being where the fire starts.
So, for instance, in this particular case, do you recall what your hypotheses were as far as the area of origin?
So the hypotheses for the area of origin, I broke down as east side of the structure, the south side of the structure, the basement, the living room, and the north side, which is going to be the kitchen dining room area.
All right, if we can work through those. Are those depicted in the photographs you have there in front of you?
Yes.
And if you can, let's start with the south side of the home. I think that was one of your hypotheses. Is that correct?
That is one, yes.
What photograph would be a good representation of that? Well, actually, strike that. Let me strike that. I apologize. Where would you have started?
I would have started at the front.
Let's go with that. What photograph would be best to start there then?
The front is 9. And we will probably go between 9 and 13.
All right, looking at 34-9, this is the front of the house, correct?
Correct.
What about, what considerations are you looking for in this photograph?
So in this photograph, I'm trying to look at fire spread. What did the fire do on this side or this exterior wall? So I look at the door, I look at the 2 windows. There's some minor sooting above the windows, but there's really no fire damage of significance to talk about. So that's telling me the fire didn't come out those windows. And if the fire would have started there, I would have expected that the fire to start to the east side. Now, as I'm doing this, also the thought process is comparative. So I'm going to compare the east room to the west room. Which one has worse fire damage? And that, because that changes scene to scene depending on the size and intensity of the fire. So for this case, that little bit of smoke coming out of that, it's going to be the left or south window, is pretty minor compared to the rest of the structure. Now, if we can skip to picture 13. So this is the aerial. At the bottom of the photograph, you can see a small roof, which is the roof over the porch. And you can see it's still there. It's not burned. But more importantly, if you look just beyond the porch, you can see a wall section and a window. And again, there's no fire damage or no fire coming out of that window. So that's telling me, compared to the rest of the house, there isn't as much fire damage. Now, in a situation like this, it's very important to distinguish between fire damage and collapse damage. So we're going to see a lot of collapse damage. The roof's collapsed, the floor's collapsed, but collapse damage is different than fire damage. So the fire is going to start, and that's going to cause the collapse. But what you can see in this photo, the window where the wall is, it's a large section. It's collapsed, but it's still there. It's not burned. It's not burned away. We look directly to the right, which is going to be the northeast corner of the house. We can also see large sections, and underneath the snow is actually sections of the roof. The roof is collapsed in. So there's still a lot of unburned material there. I also looked in those windows and those holes. I told you I really couldn't get in to the east side, but I did stick my head in and take photographs inside, like those holes that the fire department cut. I stuck my head in there, looked, and determined the fire damage there was drastically less than the west side of the house. So with that, I was able to eliminate we're gonna call the the northeast quadrant as the area of origin.
Now, and shame on me for failing to ask this, is there like a process by which a fire kind of progresses and spreads?
Yes, but that's a easy question that can lead to many complicated answers. Fire spread can be determined by fuel source, by ventilation, by location. So that's like a simplistic question where it can be very complicated as information comes forward.
Is there a way that a fire consumes a piece of fuel? For instance, strike that. We'll get to that later. With respect to collapse damage, you talked about that. What causes collapse damage?
Well, in my line of work, I'm not a structural engineer. So when I see collapse damage, it is a result of the fire. But the collapse is from the fire burning away structural members, floor, the center beam of the rafters. You see a lot of roof collapse because it burns away the peak where the trusses are, and then that makes the roof collapse. Or floor beams. Floor beams will be consumed, and that'll make the floor above them collapse.
Thank you. Now, when it comes to, so we just talked about, I think you said the northeast quadrant of the property. Is that correct?
Yes.
And you indicated that you were able to eliminate that as the area of origin?
Correct.
Where is the next place you would have progressed to?
I would have progressed to the south side.
South side?
The south side.
Okay.
So the south side, we can specifically see the roof is still there. It's still up. Let's switch over to photo 10. Don't worry,
10?
we'll go back to 13.
Excuse me?
10.
10? Oops, went too far. There we go.
So 10 is the south side of the structure. Again, I'm looking at the windows. There is fire coming out of the windows, more of the first floor than the basement. If you look at the basement windows, there is not even sooting on those windows. You look to the first floor windows, you can see there is some smoke, some light fire that melted the vinyl siding. And above that is going to be the attic space. And you can see where the fires burned through the attic space. This is telling me there's not a lot of fire in those rooms on the other side of those windows because the fire is not trying to vent out those windows. Vent is a fire department, both a firefighting and a fire investigation term, is where the fire is trying to get more oxygen to burn. The fire, most of us know that a fire needs oxygen to burn. That's how come if you throw a big pile of leaves on top of a campfire, it doesn't really do anything because the leaves have smothered the oxygen away. So now let's go back to 13 again. So 13, we can see the roof is still there. The roof hasn't collapsed. It didn't burn away. The only area is on the west side of the center line. Prosecutor Blair, if you could just zoom the area where that small burn area.
In this area here?
That area right there, yes.
Certainly.
Yes. So out of that roof section, this is the area of this section that is burned away. So I've noticed that this section is directly across from the living room versus the section on the other, and the center is the ridge line. The section to the south, or excuse me, to the east or to the bottom of the photograph, that is on the other side of the ridge line. That is significant because when fire gets into an attic space, regardless where, it's going to go to the peak. If you start a fire anywhere in the attic space, it's going to hit the roof section, it's going to hit the roof deck, and it's going to go up to the peak. And as it does that, it's going to start burning there. So we're going to have fire damage from where it enters the attic space going to the peak. So in this case, the fire is entering the attic on the west side of the peak. And you can see right at the very bottom, you can see the outline of the living room fireplace.
That'd be in this area here?
Yes, that's the living room fireplace. That, at this point, that is just for reference purposes.
Thank you.
So that helps me eliminate that. Now, remember the other photo from the inside. We're still talking about the south section. Let's look at photo 22.
All right. Mr. Leroy, let's go ahead and, if we can, kind of recap yesterday, just summarize very briefly. We were talking about determining the area of origin. Is that correct?
That's correct.
And we were going through your various hypotheses as to what may have been the area of origin at the Stermer residence. Is that also correct?
Yes.
And we had already disproved, it sounds like, two of your hypotheses as far as areas of origin from yesterday. Do you recall that?
Let me just object. Wait a minute.
I didn't use the word disprove, I eliminated.
Eliminate, fair.
Yes. Or I was still working on, I eliminated the east section of the house and we were still discussing the south section.
Very good. And my memory serves correct, it looks like we were on People's Exhibit 34-13. I'll hand you those exhibits. Yes. Yeah, I think I admitted them yesterday afternoon, like first thing. And looking at 34-13, is that the photograph that's up on the screen?
That's correct.
Okay, all right. And is that your recollection where we may have left off yesterday?
Yes, we left off there yesterday. I was discussing the remains of the southern section of roof section, and I'd drawn your attention to a small area burning in the roof just to the west, or as we look at the photograph, the top portion of the ridge line of the roof. And I just suggested we switch to an interior view of the south section, which is going to be photo 22.
Before we go to 22, I did kind of neglect to ask this question of you. When you're evaluating burn damage, what are we looking for there?
Well, as I evaluate burn damage, I'm on the basics. I'm trying to find out how bad something is burned, and understanding the part that's burned the worst is the part that's gone. So, for instance, if we're at a campfire in the backyard and you put a log on the fire and it burns, and it gets late, you go in, come out the next morning, and there's still remnants of the log left. The part of the log that's the furthest away from the fire has, sometimes it's not even burned, but it has the least amount of char. And as you look down the log towards where the fire was, it gets smaller, because that is what we refer to as mass loss. Mass of the log has been consumed away, so there's mass loss. So that's one of the things we're looking for. If there's mass loss, that means this may have been closer to the fire. And then when you get down closer to where the fire was, there's nothing left. That's also a term of mass loss. So as I'm evaluating burn damage, that is one of the things I'm looking for, is the mass loss of material, or we'll also use the word fuel. And when a fire investigator uses the word fuel, don't confuse that with like fuel for your vehicle or anything. We're talking about anything that burns. Wood, paper, plastics, anything else that can burn, we consider fuel for the fire. So that's a generalization of when I'm looking at burn damage, what I'm doing. I'm trying to evaluate that burn damage to similar structures in that burn damage. The higher, the longer the burn, the more burn damage typically means that burned longer and it is closer to where the fire started.
Now, do you also evaluate burn damage on, say, things that are not part of the house, like a person?
Yes, it's one of the reasons I looked at Todd Stermer the night is to look at the burns on him. The burns on everything, furniture, the structure, and victims are part of the burn damage that need to be evaluated.
Very good. So now we're going to turn our attention, I believe you said, to picture number 22. Is that correct?
That's correct.
And what are we looking at here again?
So this photograph, I was standing in the central portion of the basement looking towards the south. So in the previous overhead shot, the area where the roof was still intact, this is the rooms directly underneath it. So this is going to be the rooms in the southwest quadrant of the structure. I'm looking for the fire damage in these two areas. One of the things to notice is the amount of debris on the floor of the second floor. Obviously, is that the area I'm pointing to here? Correct.
Okay.
Obviously, the floor between the first floor and the basement is gone. But you can see there's still wood or wall structure that's unburned, especially if you look at the photo, the top left of the photo, you can see a wall section that is unburned. And you can see a large amount of debris that the prosecutor pointed to earlier on the floor. Now, this debris would be a accumulation from both floors. Actually, the debris you're looking at on the top, that likely came from the first floor when the floor burned away and it collapsed down. The significance there is the amount of debris in this area is more solid than the area to the center. So what I'm saying is there's less mass loss of the fuel in this area than the center area. That determination helped me eliminate the south side of the structure as an area of origin.
And is the fact that the roof still appears to be intact in that area relevant? I'm not sure if we talked about that
Yes,
yet.
it is. That's part of the overall mass and the burn area of the south side.
So at that point in time, then, you were able to eliminate that particular area of the house. Is that correct?
The south section, yes.
South section. What section did you move on to next?
Next, let's go back to photo 13.
Certainly.
So I've eliminated the east section and the south section, so that leaves what I'm referring to as the center section and the quadrant in the northwest section. The northwest section, by evaluating it, obviously there's collapse damage. There is significant burn damage here, but by looking at it, I'm comparing the amount of mass of the fuel that's left, the amount of structure that's burned or unburned, and there is significantly more on the north side of unburned area. You can also see kind of in the middle between the north area and the center, there are studs. In this picture, they're actually kind of horizontal, but that's the picture of a wall that's collapsed down. But those studs are still intact, which denoted a wall section between, or a wall section between the north part and the central part.
Just so the record's clear, we're talking about the area in the kind of upper right part of the photo here where I'm circling with my pointer?
Correct.
Okay. All right. And so at this point in time, were you able to eliminate that area, or is there additional evidence you need to consider?
So at that point, I eliminated that area, the northern area, as an area of origin. So now I'm concentrating on the center section. The center section has two floors, the main floor and the basement. I can see it with this photo. You can see it with this photo. You can see at the top of the photo, there's the exterior wall that appears to have remnants of a bay windows that would typically.
This area here, sir?
Yes.
Okay.
That you would expect to see with a cathedral ceiling. So I'm going to examine this area. Now I want to determine if it's the first floor or the basement where the fire starts. So, I apologize. So if we can pull up photo 12.
12? That's easy.
So we're examining the west side or back side of the structure from the exterior. Important things to notice is, now I've already eliminated those sections, so I'm kind of concentrating on the center portion. I'm looking at the fire damage that's coming out of the windows. So where is the fire from inside the house first and longest coming out of the house? We look to the large bow windows. We can see there's heavy charring all around those window sections. We've already seen that the roof in this area is consumed away.
And we're talking, just so I'm clear, this area here, is that correct?
Correct.
Okay.
Now, if you look to the right, we're still talking the main floor, the area that I previously eliminated, but you can see that there's fire coming out of that window, and you can see the black, and it kind of comes out in kind of a cone shape out of the window, as the fire does. Now let's compare those two areas, the burn damage there, to the windows on the basement level.
That would be these windows down in this area here.
Correct. So notice the amount of fire, or specifically lack of fire, coming out of those windows. Let's go to photo 17.
17?
Yes. So this is the close-up of the door leading into the basement. We've talked about how heavy the fire is to the windows above, but this basement window, there is no fire coming out of that door. And the two windows on the side, the one to the left doesn't have any smoke or fire coming out of it. The one to the right has some smoke and probably a little bit of heat coming out of it. But comparatively to those other windows, and especially the windows above, dramatically less. The reason for this is, or let me say it a different way. If, as I'm thinking about area of origin, if I think, what would this look like if this fire started in the basement? If that fire had started in the basement in this center section, what would that fire do? It would eventually go up to the ceiling, which is going to be the floor of the first floor, and from there it's going to start spreading to other areas of the basement, including venting out those windows. Now, if it goes long enough, it will eventually burn through the floor, and then it will go up into the living room. But before that happens, it's going to burn and spread through the basement. Let's look at it the other way around. If the fire starts on the first floor, where's that fire going to go? The fire's going to want to go up. So as it goes up and it starts spreading on that main floor, it's going to spread, eventually go through the windows, and then it will start attacking the roof. At some point, the roof, in this case, burned, collapsed, and when it collapsed, it came down. Whoops, I'm sorry. When it came down, and then it started burning away the floor. At some point in this incident, the floor burned away, and then all of that debris on the first floor now dropped into the basement. But since the roof was already burned away, the fire will go straight up instead of going sideways. It's sort of like if you're outside and you have a burn barrel, and you have all kinds of holes in the side of the burn barrel. When you light something on fire in that burn barrel, the fire doesn't come out the holes in the side because it can go straight up and out. So that's kind of an analogy for what's going on here. Because the roof is already burned away, the fire that's now in the house can go straight up and not out those windows. So given that information, I've now narrowed my area of origin to the main floor living room in the central part of the house, central west part of the house.
And if we flip back to People's Exhibit 13, that would be this area right here where I'm circling with my pointer. Is that correct?
Yes. If you can, could you zoom in to that area real quick?
Yes.
So the boundaries of that room, you can see towards the bottom of the photograph, there's a wall section that is above the fireplace. So that would be the eastern wall of the living room. On the left side where that roof is, that would be the boundary for the south side of the living room. We know you can see the exterior is the boundary to the west side of the living room, and where you see that wall collapsed, that would be the boundary for the north side of the living room. So in that area that we're looking at right now, on the main floor, is the area of origin. Is what I determined to be the area of origin.
So you determined the area of origin to be the living room of the Stermer residence?
Correct.
And in determining the area of origin, at the time you determined this originally, did you have information about the statements of what Linda Stermer had stated to either Mr. Shinsky or other investigators?
Not at this point, no.
And had you received any information about the gasoline present on Mr. Stermer's sweatpants, if you recall?
I had not received well, I hadn't even taken the sweatpants to the lab at this point.
Okay.
Because this was all done on the January 8th.
And I think we've already touched on this a little bit. The next finding you need to make is basically the cause of the fire. Is that fair?
Correct.
And how is it you go about doing that?
To determine the cause, I say cause, what started the fire? What was the ignition source of the fire is trying to determine the cause of the fire. It's one of the kind of the same process, the scientific method as we did with origin. I'm looking in the area of origin, and I'm figuring what is there that can start a fire. Now, I'm breaking this down into origin and cause and section, but as the two in real life kind of happens simultaneously. As I'm looking through the house, I'm taking notice. As I'm looking for the area of origin, I'm obviously taking notice of items that may be a cause of the fire or need to be considered a cause of the fire. We kind of break it down, one for analysis purposes, one or the other, but really it almost happens at the same time as you're walking around. So in the area of origin, things I considered at what could start the fire. The fireplaces, an associated chimney. Considered smoking, electrical, the furnace, the laundry machines. And I also considered an intentionally set fire as a possible fire cause. So then I start examining those to see if I can eliminate them from the scenario.
Are you familiar with the term ignition source?
Yes.
What is that?
Ignition source is something that generates enough heat to ignite or catch fire a piece of fuel.
And are you familiar with the term first fuel ignited?
The term is pretty self-explanatory. The ignition source comes into the fuel that is first ignited or first caught on fire.
Fair enough. Let's, if we can, then work through your hypotheses as to what may have caused the fire at the Stermer residence, if we can. What was the first hypotheses you would have tested against the data you collected?
The first one I would have looked at is the laundry machines. We had one photo of, got a couple photos actually. If we go to photo 23.
Certainly. Looking at 23?
Yes, 23.
Okay.
So when we introduced this photo yesterday, I mentioned you could directly in the middle of the photograph on the other side of those 2x4s is a white vertical. That is the side of one of the laundry machines. And we don't need to go to it, but we also showed a photo of the dryer. Those can be eliminated as a fire cause because they're not in the area of origin. They're on the other side of that 2x4 wall, and there is, one of the mental exercises a fire investigator goes through when he looks at an area of an ignition source, excuse me, is you look at that and say, okay, if this started the fire, what would this fire look like? If the fire starts in one of those laundry machines or at one of those laundry machines, it's going to spread from the laundry room, going to go up, it's going to spread outward. Well, as it does that, it's going to start consuming fuel, the structure of the house. Well, in this case, you can in order for that amount of fire damage to occur in the living room, it would have had to, the fire from the laundry room would have had to burn through that wall or up the stairs. Well, there's still significant mass left of that wall. As a matter of fact, if you look at those studs, 2x4s, they're not even smoked. The typical reason those aren't even smoked in this case is because they had drywall on them. If you can see that center 2x4 towards the bottom, you can see a little, right there, you can see a strip that's kind of greenish and white. That's leftover drywall or gypsum board. So that was on that wall, and drywall serves as a fire barrier. And so that would have kept the fire from the laundry room into the living room. The reason it's gone now is during fire suppression, that drywall gets crumbly in the fire, and then when it's hit with a high-pressure water hose, then it falls off. So with that, I can eliminate laundry machines as the cause of the fire. I also considered the furnace. Let's look at photo 26.
Is that photo 26?
Yes. This is right in the center of the photograph. You can see the sheet metal. That is the furnace. Again, notice the amount of structural material that's still there compared to the living room. And go to photo 27. That is a closer view of the furnace. Now the furnace is damaged because the upper stories collapsed on top of it, so there was damage. I examined the fuel lines, didn't find any significant leak in the fuel lines that I could see visually or I could test, and there was structural damage, or the structural damage around the furnace was less than the area of origin in the living room. So with that, I was able to eliminate the furnace as a cause of the fire.
What would be another possible hypothesis you would consider as to the cause of this fire?
One of the hypotheses was smoking, but I learned that that there was no smoker, or that no one smoked cigarettes in the Stermer household. I think occasionally, I was said that Todd would occasionally smoke a pipe, but no one smoked cigarettes in the home.
And did you receive any indication that anyone was smoking in the house that day?
I did not.
And what else did you consider as a possible hypothesis for the cause of the fire?
I considered electrical cause. Well, let me back up. I considered an electrical cause. Electrical cause is a little more difficult because a lot of the electrical components are missing, which is not uncommon when you're doing a fire investigation, especially one of this magnitude, that sometimes the electrical components just are gone. So you have to consider how the fire burned, the fire dynamics. And you have to consider where the electrical is located. Electrical is located typically in the walls or the ceiling. So if the electrical system malfunctioned or failed, that fire is going to be in the wall. And electrical fires start small. So if you think about if you have something plugged into an outlet and that starts sparking and catches on fire, well, that fire is going to start small and is going to slowly grow. It's not going to be a large, expansive fire at the onset. It's going to slowly grow. The indication, number one, we noticed a lot of the walls are still in place, right? When we looked at the photographs for the southern bedrooms, we had that one wall that was still there. We still had significant wall structure on I'm talking about studs. The studs are left on the north side. So if an electrical fire would start in those walls, we wouldn't see those studs, because they would have to, same thing, the fire would have to burn out, get rid of those studs before it could get into the living room and burn up to the roof. And the origin is not coming from any of the wall areas, it's coming more from the living space of the living room, on the first floor living room. So given the fire dynamics, the way the fire reacted, and the lack of initial damage to the walls, I eliminated electrical cause at that point.
Now, you mentioned an electrical fire is kind of a fire that starts small. Is that what you elaborated on here?
Correct.
And is that if you can opine on this, a fast developing fire or a kind of a smoldering, slow developing fire?
The development of the fire would all depend on the fuel load around it. The electrical short or the electrical fire starts small, but if that electrical fire happened to have been surrounded by styrofoam, it's going to burn faster than if it was just touching wood. So that varies.
Would there be smoke?
There would be smoke.
And to your understanding, how many people were in the Stermer residence on January 7th, 2007?
I was told on both 7th and the 8th that there was 2 people in the residence, Todd Stermer and Linda Stermer.
And is the fact that there are 2, and this fire occurred about what time, if you recall?
3:30 in the afternoon or 2:30? I'd have to look at a report to get the exact time, but it was in the afternoon.
In the afternoon. And typical hours when people would be awake?
Correct.
And does that factor into this decision at all, that there were 2 persons in the home that would likely be awake?
Yes, I was given initial information from the Van Buren County detectives who did some initial interviews on the 7th that there were 2 people. Linda and Todd were in the house at the time of the fire, and they were both awake. Todd may have been taking a nap, but Linda was awake. These were some initial statements that the Sheriff's Department relayed to me.
So I guess to kind of get to the bottom of my question here, and to your knowledge, were either of the Stermers disabled or invalided of any kind?
Not that I'm aware of.
In fires you've investigated before, does that play a role in that in when there's a fatality or something sometimes?
Yes, it does.
How so?
I've done fatal fires before where people were bedbound or wheelchair bound. I think one of the fires, the person was wheelchair bound, and the fire started in their lap from smoking, and because they were wheelchair bound and they were by themselves, they couldn't escape. Same thing, I've had people who are bedridden, fire starts, and they're unable to escape because they physically can't move. Also, occasionally, I've had it where people are known to be intoxicated and in bed, and this can also impair their ability to escape or to self-rescue themselves from a fire.
Would you agree with the premise then that the likelihood that a person is awake and not invalid, for lack of better words, would increase the chance that they may notice a small fire or a fire starting slowly? Don't think so at all. I think it's a hypothesis.
I'll overrule that. I don't think it's legal.
Yes, I would take that in consideration. The general condition of a person and how quickly they discovered the fire or they could take action about the fire, both mental and physical state.
I mean, this kind of goes without saying, but does smoke have a smell to it?
Typically,
Do electrical fires have a certain smell to them?
they do, and sometimes they're associated with sound,
What kind of sound?
like an arcing sound. Not everyone. Electrical fires is kind of a broad category, and I got to be very careful to try to lump one generalization to all electrical fires.
And when you describe an arcing sound, is it like an electrical current kind of sound? Like the sound of...
If you take two wires and you touch them together, and it's going to go, you can hear the zap pop, and usually if you're holding the wires, you usually jump.
Fair, thank you. Just want to make sure everyone understood that in case people haven't played with electricity. What was the next, so at that point in time, I guess, were you able to eliminate electrical as a
I
cause?
eliminated electrical as a fire cause at that point.
What was the next hypothesis you would have tested in this case?
I examined and considered the fireplace for a hypothesis. On the day of my exam on the 8th, I believe I was aware that there could have been a fire in the upstairs fireplace from the information that was passed to me by the Sheriff's Department detectives.
If I can stop you right there, when we say upstairs, we're talking about the main floor of the house, is that
Correct.
Okay.
There's basement and the main floor, and if I misspeak, I say main floor, first floor, I'm meaning the main floor where the living room is.
Very good.
So I started examining the fireplaces. Let's look at photo 19.
Is that photo 19 on the screen?
This is photo 19. This is the main floor fireplace. Before I talk about this, I just want to go to photo 20 real quick. Yes, that's photo 20. I documented what was inside the fireplace, and there is burnt wood in the fireplace. So that tells me there may have been a fire. Now, obviously, is it possible that fire debris during the collapse got in there? It's possible, but unlikely, because the collapse is going to come straight down versus jump sideways. This is likely it's probable that there was a fire in that main floor fireplace. Now we can go back to 19. So I'm examining the fireplace. To understand the construction of this fireplace, this is a modern fireplace versus I'll call an old-time hand-built fireplace. Old-time hand-built fireplace, the kind you'll find in the nice farmhouses that are 150 years old. They were built piece by piece with stone or brick, made the firebox where the fire actually was built. There was a brick or clay liner in the chimney that went up to carry the smoke out. Typical modern fireplaces are a contained steel box, and that's what you're looking at there. And out of the top of the steel box is a steel round chimney pipe. Sometimes it's referred to as a vent or a flue, and that is the round chimney pipe that's connected to that firebox, the steel firebox, and then it runs up, eventually out through the roof. Then what's the important part for that is the actual fireplace construction. Typically then, people build walls around it because nobody wants to look at the ugly backside of a metal fireplace or the fireplace, the chimney. So they will build walls around it, and sometimes you'll see they'll actually put like brick or stone on these walls, but that's just for decoration. The walls themselves are typically built of wood. And I refer to that as the chimney chase. So that's the area inside or around the fire, the chimney, the metal chimney, that's separating that chimney from the rest of the living portion of the house, is this chase. And it's typically built with wood. It may be drywalled. Sometimes they'll have OSB on there. It varies on construction, but that's a chimney chase. If there is, so I'm considering ignition sources from the fireplace. Did the chimney malfunction? Was there a chimney fire? If the chimney malfunctions, I've seen it where holes have developed in chimney pipe. So now the hot gases from the smoke that go up the chimney can escape the chimney itself and get into this chase area. Now this chase area is built with, especially in this case, you can see it's built with wooden structural members. So that those wooden structural members have some sort of sheeting on the outside. Could be OSB, could be drywall. That's going to contain, just like we talked about earlier with the laundry machines. If that hot smoke or gases are in that chase, that's going to contain that hot gases and eventual fire for a while inside that chase. The fire inside that chase is going to go up, typically burn out the roof at the top of the chase, and then it's going to eventually spread outward. And as it spreads outward, it's going to consume the fuel or the wooden structural material that make up that chase to proceed. And typically that'll always happen at the top versus the bottom, depending on where the hot gases from the chimney collect the most and longest for the fire to start. Excuse me. You can see here on the photo 19, this is the upstairs fireplace again, and you can see the remnants of the wall that was built around it. This wall would have been part of the chimney chase, where the metal chimney would have gone behind it. You can see there's 3 2x4 studs still in place and intact to the right. There's one directly above that is broken up to the left. That's broken off, but in your mind's eye, you can straighten it up and you can see where it would be. And there's one that's missing directly above it, of the fireplace. There's an area where there should have been one. And you can, if you know what you're looking for, right at the bottom, you can see the stub where the nails were, right there. Yeah, there was one. Now, that's obviously, remember, we've had a lot of fire in here and structural collapse. And we've also have that 2x6 that runs horizontally right across the top of the fireplace. That still has clean wood and burned. So like I mentioned before, that likely had drywall on it up until the fire hoses hit it and knocked it off. So looking at the damage profile, specifically the lack of damage there, that's significant in considering this as a chimney fire or a fireplace fire. Additionally, if we look at photo 21, this is the chimney pipe that I collected from inside the structure. Later, yesterday we talked about excavating. Later I would excavate then it would be the basement floor, but had the debris from both the basement, main floor, and the roof directly above in this area. This chimney pipe was located. I moved it out and I put it here. I examined it and nothing extraordinary came to my attention. Obviously, if you look at it, it's bent, it's burned, but remember there was a whole house burning on top of it at one point. So, and the collapse happened. That's going to disform the metal, disform the pipe, and it was under burning roof sections for a while. So there is fire damage. But that being, what I discovered is there was nothing obvious to me that would indicate there was something wrong with that chimney. And that also is states for the fireplace itself, I didn't find anything obvious with the metal fireplace box that would show that it malfunctioned or there was something wrong with it. And that backs up with the lack of burning of the stud, the wooden stud members around it. At that point, I could eliminate the fireplace and chimney as a potential ignition source.
If I can back up then to number 19, I guess, and maybe I missed this, but can you explain why it is you would expect this stud right here to be burned?
If the fireplace was the start of the fire is going to be directly above the fire. I'm sorry, I'm doing that again. Is going to be directly above the fireplace, and that's going to be one of the first structural members that are going to burn.
And so I guess just by the dynamic, would we expect then, as it burns to the roof, hot material to be falling down on top of the fireplace? Or what are we?
It depends if we're talking about the fires in the chase or outside the chase.
Inside the chase.
If it's inside the chase, the fire's going to go up inside the chase. If it burns the roof section, that'll eventually burn and fall down into and sit on top of the fireplace itself. I've seen fires in new houses before where the cellulose insulation will fall in. And on top of that firebox, and start the fire on top of that box, of the firebox. But the fire is inside the chase, sitting on top of that metal firebox, not in the place where the fire is supposed to be, which is surrounded by like fire bricks. So yes, if the fire was down there, we'd expect to burn off that area.
And what other hypothesis did you consider as to the cause of the fire?
I considered the possibility of a log rolling out of the fireplace. The entire living room was consumed. The floor, the furniture, the whole thing was consumed. So by looking at that hypothesis, that was more of a mental examination of the fire dynamics. So we think about, okay, what would happen if a log on fire rolled out into the room? If that burning log is sitting in the middle of the room, the fire from that log is still going to go up. It's going to start burning the floor underneath it, but for the fire to spread from that log, it's going to take a significant amount of time. And when I mean significant, I mean it's going to take several minutes for it to really spread versus if a log rolls onto your floor in your living room, the whole living room floor isn't going to burst into flames. It's going to take a while for it to progress. Same thing if that log, let's say, rolled all the way over and was up against a couch. The couch is going to catch fire, yes, but if you would watch it, it would start at the log, it would start slowly moving up and into the couch and start slowly spreading on the couch. And of course, as it's doing this, it's giving off smoke and heat that would be easily detectable by someone in the house before it could spread to the entire living room area. So with that, that dynamic eliminates the log hypothesis as a fire cause.
And if I can kind of circle back to the idea of a chimney or a fireplace fire, you indicated that those are kind of it takes time for the heat to build up before that fire can erupt, for lack of better words.
Because yes, the main heat is contained in the firebox and in the chimney. How that heat gets out usually comes from a small, like a chimney, even a chimney fire. It's a chimney fire that escapes the chimney. It's coming through a small hole. So that's all the heat has to come through that small hole until at some point it ignites the surrounding chimney chase. And that can take time. Obviously, times are very subjective depending on how close the wood, the combustible materials are to the chimney, how long has it been, and how old is it, the materials that are made of, so that's very subjective. But yes, it doesn't, if you have a hole in your chimney, you start a fire, it's not gonna the whole thing isn't gonna burst into flames. There's gonna be a progression.
In that progression, would there be smoke?
There would be.
And is that something that possibly a person who's not invalid would possibly notice within the residence?
He's not any kind of human factors expert. What somebody would or would not do is not within his expertise.
I think he's capable of testifying based on his training experience about, he's investigated these in the past. I think it's fairly reasonable.
I'll allow it.
A typical person should notice smoke in their house. Where that, again, every fire is a little different, so I can't say if this would have been a chimney fire exactly how the smoke and heat would have progressed.
Fair, thank you. And so we've talked about a log rolling out, and you have eliminated that. What is your next hypothesis that you went to?
One of the hypotheses I considered was during the interviews, the initial interviews with Linda Stermer, she mentioned that there was some an oil candle on the, I believe it was the half wall between the living room and the dining room on the north side. Again, I considered that. Again, that is a small fire source. I don't know what this oil candle looked like. I'm using generalization terms. I'm assuming it is a normal, could be as much as a lantern, an oil lantern, or a smaller candle that's from.
Well then, yeah, he's describing what are possible oil lanterns that he's encountered, so I think he's even said he doesn't know what it was, but he's just describing what they could be.
I'll allow it.
I was given information that there was an oil candle in the area. Do not know the size or makeup of it. But if this candle broke or tipped over, again, the fire is going to be relatively small. And it's going to be contained over towards the area of where it was located, which is the half wall towards the north side of the living room. That did not, again, that also has a hard time meeting the challenge of going undiscovered until it was a very large fire.
And these oil lamps, are you familiar with what type of fuel they burn?
The typical oil that these lamps burn are lamp oil. It would actually, if it's tested in a lab, it would come back referred to as a heavy petroleum distillate, which is the same as kerosene or diesel fuel.
And in this case, did you ever receive any lab reports that there was a heavy, which you just described here in court, present in the Stermer residence?
In the lab results back, there were no indications of a heavy petroleum distillate.
Thank you. And what was the next hypothesis you would have considered?
The next hypothesis I considered was an intentionally started fire. With this hypothesis, the one piece of data on this date, I had smelled accelerant on Todd Stermer's pants. I later learned to further that hypothesis, I waited until I got lab results. I got the lab results back that Todd Stermer's pants had gasoline on them. So I took that information and said, does that fit what I have at the scene? So with a gasoline is on Todd Stermer, and Todd Stermer is also severely burned. So remember I talked about burns on people are also burn patterns. Just like looking at the structure, the burns on Todd Stermer indicated he was at or near the,
Move to strike. One, he's not a medical expert, and under Smelser versus Norfolk Railway, he can't testify to medical conditions.
He's not
He's not
testifying about a
qualified
medical
to that.
condition. He's
He's
talking
talking
about the
about
burns he
He's
observed on
talking
his
about
body.
causation.
You're both talking at the
Sorry.
same time.
Thank you. He's talking about causation, burn patterns causing whatever this degree of injury is. That's a medical opinion he can't make.
I don't think that's what he was testifying to. I think
Just
Mr.
asking about burn patterns?
Yeah,
All of the testimony is to burn patterns. And obviously, cross-examination would be allowed.
thank you.
burns on a person is a burn pattern. It is stated right in NFPA 921 that burns on a human is a burn pattern.
You just mentioned NFPA 921. We haven't heard that here in court yet today.
Oh,
What is that?
okay.
What is that, please?
NFPA 921, it's a long acronym. The NFPA stands for National Fire Protection Association. The National Fire Protection Association puts out volumes and volumes of information about building construction, safety precautions, anything to do with fire. And there's so many of them, they give them a number. So the specific number, NFPA, National Fire Protection Association 921, is the document that the National Fire Protection Association puts out as a guide to fire investigations. And that is updated, well, now it's updated about every 3 years.
Guide, or has it also been considered a reference manual?
It's a guide, it's a reference manual.
Very good. So again, we just talked about you considered the burns on Todd Stermer. How is that relevant to your determination of an intentionally set fire?
We know that Todd, with the burns on Todd, I know he is at or near the area of origin. And with the gasoline, positive for gasoline on his sweatpants, that says there is gasoline at or near the area of origin. Now, the gasoline at the area of origin actually fits the description of a fast-moving fire, where instead of a small individual area, the whole area is on fire at the same time.
Well, let's go this way. Does the statement of Linda Stermer that you reviewed factor into this as well?
Linda Stermer's statement is very important to my factor.
Why is that?
Because Linda Stermer was at the scene. She was in the house. She was able to give statements. Witness statements are very important. Her statement was that she was in the basement. She heard Todd upstairs scream. She ran upstairs and she saw the living room on fire. Subsequent statements, that was the initial statement I believe she gave the detective route. Then later statements were more specific. It says, started the same, in the basement, heard Todd scream, ran up the stairs, described seeing the recliner towards the north side of the living room on fire. Todd was towards the south in the living room with his upper torso on fire. And there was fire on the floor between Todd and the recliner. That description of a very quick starting fire, of she's in the basement, she's awake, and she hears a scream, that would be in. Then she goes upstairs and finds this large fire, not concentrated in one area, but it's spread in two areas across the room with a connecting fire between. That is an indication of a fast fire, which would be explained by the presence of an ignitable liquid gasoline, which would lead to, there's been no evidence of why gasoline should be in the living room. That would to lead me to believe this is an intentionally set fire.
Now, additionally, the, for lack of a word, trail of fire from essentially one side of the living room to the other was described by Linda Stermer. Is that what your testimony was?
Yes.
And in your line of work, is that described as something?
It can mean several things.
Okay.
I'd prefer just to leave it at that statement.
Okay, fair enough. So your conclusion, based on your review of the evidence, and I'm summarizing the gasoline and what was described by Linda Stermer, is this was an intentionally set fire. Is that correct?
Correct. And this also, I also use this to confirm my origin determination. She says the origin is in the main floor, first floor living room.
And so we've already kind of talked about what the first fuel ignited is earlier. Do you have an opinion as to what the first fuel ignited in this case was?
Yes, I do.
What was that?
The first fuel ignited was fumes from the gasoline.
And let's talk about that a little bit. How does gasoline burn, for lack of a better way to describe it?
Gasoline, as we know, is liquid. We put it in our lawnmowers and our cars. People who are unsafe sometimes try to use it to get their leaves burning. When you burn gasoline, it's actually not the liquid that burns. It's the vapor that comes off the gasoline that burns. So if you've ever seen videos of people pour gasoline on a pile of leaves and then they start walking up to it with something to light it, and it catches on fire before they get to the pile of leaves, that's because the vapors from the gasoline, the liquid gasoline, has now evaporated and spread into a vapor cloud until it hits an ignition source, and then it ignites.
And does the fact that the gasoline may be indoors or outdoors affect how that may happen?
The environment as a whole, indoors or outdoors, is going to affect, is there a wind, the temperature, if it's hotter outside, the gasoline is going to evaporate quicker. Any air currents are going to move the vapor around.
And in this case, I've already asked you what the ignition source. Did you determine what you believe to be the ignition source in this case?
The ignition source would have been open flame.
Do you have any idea what the source of the open flame may have been?
I do not know definitively what the open flame would be.
But we do know there was a fire burning in the fireplace per the statements of Linda Stermer.
There was open flame in the living room from statements and indications that there's logs, so there would have been open flame in the fireplace.
Now, we've talked about what you kind of touched on it already, but what is a flash fire?
A flash fire is almost self-descriptive. It's a fire that immediately propagates quickly, like a flash. It goes very fast. It would be indicative of a gasoline fire.
So, for instance, when the vapors of a gasoline poured someplace are exposed to an open flame.
Correct. It's the vapors are going to ignite. The fire and the vapors are going to spread to the source, which is typically going to be the liquid gasoline, because that's where the source of the gasoline vapors came from. And then the fire is then going to make the liquid gasoline evaporate faster because it's hotter, and then it'll be burned more. And it'll burn faster until the gasoline, in some cases, is burned up.
And that was my next question. Can fire totally consume gasoline,
Yes,
leaving no trace?
it is possible. Yes.
And just so the record's clear, and Judge, I'm going to ask this as a leading question so we don't go afoul of anything. You are not offering any opinion here today as to who set this fire, correct?
No.
You have just a moment, Your Honor? Just one last question. I am sorry. I neglected to ask this. You indicated earlier there was a fuel oil furnace in this house. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Is fuel oil different from gasoline?
It is.
How so?
So they're both petroleum products, but they're refined differently. If you were to take fuel oil and submit it to the laboratory for analysis, that would come back as a heavy petroleum distillate. The lab, and if you ever had Troy Ernst, he'd probably describe this better than I did, but it is a different than gasoline. Gasoline can be determined specifically, where the other petroleum distillates are put into broad categories of heavy, medium, and light petroleum distillates. Fuel oil would be a heavy petroleum distillate, along with kerosene and some lamp oils.
Thank you. Nothing further. Thank you, Your Honor.